Hello everyone, welcome back. So it's been a while and I apologize for taking so long. Alright, so I think I'm back and we can proceed from where we left off. So before we actually delve into developments, I had recorded this particular episode earlier and for some however I lost it. So in the process of trying to get things back to the way it was, I kind of had changed a lot of things. Yeah, so this is more like a heads up in case you see some content that really did not match with what you currently have. Okay? So with that being said, let's get into it and develop. Alright, so here is our code. It's currently running. Here is the view. And we can access the pages and then the chat interface. Alright? So this is where we would kick it off. Okay? So let's first log in. Alright, so here is we logging in and that's still functional. So if we click on this user, we can still send message. I think that's what we did last. So send message. Alright, so from here we can try to connect what we have so far to the backend. So the way the backend works is that you really don't need to manually send the sockets. So the backend automatically sends, or rather it connects to our socket service and automatically push necessary information to the socket service. So this particular part might not be needed anymore. Right, so that's the first part we are removing. And the next thing we want to do is to actually get the messages we have on the backend. So let's define a function for that. So it's going to be an asynchronous function since we will connect to the internet. Alright, so here is the function. We actually need somewhere to call it from, and that's going to be the use effect. So literally, as soon as we switch to different users, we should be able to get messages for the users. Alright, so now we can call our get messages from here. So the next thing we want to do is to get our token, since we are going to be making use of the token. So const token equals to our await get token. Then we can now make our request. So const result, we'll store it in results equals to our await as use handler. And the method is going to be a get method. By the way, I've changed my OS, so those are part of the reason why there are a lot of delay. So I was trying to get things adjusted. Okay, so that's by the way. So let's continue. So we specify the method we want to use, and that's get. Then we can define the URL, which we currently don't have access to. So let's quickly specify the message URL. So we would export const message underscore URL. So the base URL plus message, then message. That's how we define this on our backend. Okay. Then here we can have the message URL. Then the next is going to be the token. We've already specified that. Alright, so one thing to note here is that we need to specify the user we are getting the message for. So currently, this is the logged in user, also near the Femi. Then when we click on Ben Tennyson, we should be able to specify that we are getting messages between myself, the logged in user, and Ben Tennyson. Alright, so to do that, I think we did it then on the server. So we specified that we handled user ID. So when you specify the user ID, and this would be the logged in user ID, or rather the active user ID, the user you are connecting to, then it gets the message between the two users. Okay, so we can have the user underscore ID, then we'll specify the active user ID. Alright, so next thing is to cache if there is an error. So all we want to do for now is just log it. Alright. So the next now is to check if result exists. So the way this works is that if there is no error, then result will exist. However, if there is an error, then this will be null. So let's console log result.data. Alright. So going back to our browser, let's open our console. Then let's click on this user. We should get the results. Alright, so this is what it contains. So this is what the data contains. We have the count, the result, and the next, previous, and the results. So let's put things in place. So for the messages variable here, we want to set the results to that. So set messages, and that will be results.data.results. Okay. So there's another thing we need to factor in. So for instance, we might have more messages, because by default the maximum messages we can return at a particular point is just 20. So let's say we have 1 million, then we want it paginated. So to handle this, we will create a separate variable to handle next page. Set next page, and this will be use state. So by default, the next page will be 1, that's page 1. And the way we want to handle this is if result.data.next, so that is if we can go next. So we can increment the next page, and there is another variable we might need. So that will be the can go next. Right, so by default this will be false, and here we are going to set two things. So set can go next equals to true. Also set next page will be page, it will be the current page, so next page plus 1. So that's just going to be an increment. So based on this particular flow, that means every time we try to get messages, then we can set the can go next to false, so that works. Right, so that's all we need to do. We've set in our messages, and from here we can now set fetching to be false. Alright, so even though by default it's false, so let's do that. Set fetching equals to false. Alright, so we can now return this back to true. So if we go back to the browser and we click on this user, by default it's fetching, and as soon as it's done, we get the no message yet. Okay, so if we go back to our code, this is the structure. So we have the chatbot, but I think we did this from the last episode. I think there is no major change here. Alright, so that's done. We've been able to get messages. So the next thing we want to do now is to push message to our backend. So to do that, we need to update some little things. So the sender, this becomes sender ID, this becomes receiver ID, then we get the ID from the user, so user.id. So the next thing now is to push. So let's get the token again, we need it. Then let's also make use of this. Right, so we await our result as usual. Then this becomes a post. We don't need this. Then we send in our token, then our data. Alright, so here is the structure. So we have two ways of handling this. Well, we can send in our message, wait for it to be delivered, then we get our messages. So more like we want to get messages. So this will update with the message we just sent. However, that can be task key, because every time we send message, we access the backend again to get information. That's like too much. So another thing we can do is we can literally just update the message data from here. So from here we can check the index where this is stored, then we send the message here. So I think we'll go with this last flow, because that's going to be much more optimized. Okay. All right. So to actually undo that, we need to get the last index of messages. So by default, we know that's the index, the new data we are sending will take. So we can do that by saying last index equals to messages dot index or dot length rather. All right. Now when we get our result back, so that will be, so here now we are checking if we got the result back. Then we want to update the messages on that particular index. Okay, so what we can do here is we can say set messages into last index equals to results dot data. So I'm hopeful that the result of data will just be the response. Okay, so that's all we need to do, and the effect we are going to get here is that when we are sending the message and it has not delivered, then we don't see any time, but as soon as it has delivered, the time it delivered comes up. Okay, so let's see this, let's check it out. Let's send the message, hello Ben. Alright, so we got an error, and that's probably because the structure. Okay, so messages is okay, so since I've changed the little, so instead of doing it like this, I think we can probably check the result first. So console.log result the data. Alright, so we've sent a message and here we have it. So we've not rendered the time well, that's why we are not showing the time here. We are going to undo that later. So let's check the structure of the results when we send a message. So console hello. Alright, so this is the structure of our results. So I think the error we have is, so this is what we want actually, but I think the error we are having is as a result of the way we set this. So what we can do is we can just have this as this, then we can then set messages. I think that should work. Let's test again. So I think that works and we are good. So let's quickly fix the time so that we can get the effect we want. So the structure of the message, so let's quickly print that out here. So let's go to the chat bubble to print that out. So console.log oh, okay, I guess we won't be able to print it out from here because we didn't set the O item. So let's just print the messages here. Console.log messages. So I think you are already noticing an issue here. So this should be the one at the list, not up. So we will rectify that by adding reverse function to our array. But here, so this is the structure of this. So the created at is what we want to deal with. I think we can work with the created at. So in here for the time, so we can check if there is created at. So item dot created at, because by default there won't be the created at unless we send the message and it has gotten the result back. So if item dot created that, then we want to actually get the time, else we want to just return an empty string. And for this we are going to make use of moments. I don't know if I installed moments in the last episode, however we'll be needing it. Here it is. Okay, so we'll make use of moments, import moments from moments. Alright, so we've gotten moments. Then the next thing is to specify and format our time. So item.created at is what we'll pass to the moments. Then we can now format it. So it depends. Maybe we want to group the message by time or so. But depending on that, we can decide on how to format the time. But for now, I think I'll just add in the dates as well as the time. So I can say YYY, then MM-DD, then space, then the time, HH, then MM, then A. Alright, so we got what we are looking for here. So here is what it looks like. So next thing is to actually reverse the way the result comes in, and we can do that by just reversing our results here. So results.reverse, and that will handle the rest. So if we click on this user again, you should get the latest message down here. Okay. Alright, so that's the flow we need to implement here. So the next thing we want to do now is to actually ensure that the other party also receives the message. So every party is actually chatting with each other. Alright, so here is my incognito, and I'll log in with Ben. So Ben, then I'll input Ben's password. Oh, okay, that's not valid. Not sure what I used as Ben's username again. Alright, so let me fetch that out. Alright, so I think the issue we are having is because Ben's username is case sensitive. So I think we probably might want to resolve that later on. So if we want to accept case sensitive contests, right? And now we can log into Ben, and also Ben has 3 messages. So the counting here is actually wrong. So the idea is that Ben actually sees 3 messages from Hosseini until he then reads it. However, since Hosseini is the one sending the message, this should not be showing the 3 messages. Okay, so I'll click on Hosseini now and we should get a message. Also, the rendering here is still wrong. We are going to resolve those later on. But what we want to focus now is to ensure that the 2 parties are getting their messages. And first thing first is to check that the messages are getting to the point. So we are opening the console here so that we can see the messages when they are sent. The next thing is we can go to our socket service. Yeah, I commented this out because this is one of the changes I've made. And what we want to do is we want to check the user ID. I think I've shown how we got this already. So when we log in, we added the active user to the use contests, and now we can get the user and also the receiver here. We have specified the receiver. Alright, so to just be clear, let's see the structure the data is coming out with. So console.log into data. Then if I come back to our browsers and let's click on this user. So hello. Alright, so we got the message and the receiver seems to be the ID. So I think what we have there is correct. So data then receiver. Right. So what we are doing next is we are dispatching. So type is active chat action, then the payload. Even though the payload is really not necessary, we are not dispatching the payload so that we can push it to our message list. We are dispatching the payload just to change this particular content here. Alright? So the next thing we want to do is we can now listen to that change, this particular active action. So we can listen to whenever it changes. So for that we need use effect, use context rather. And here we can define the state. So const state into, so let's be sure of the state. So that's active chat. So that's the one responsible for the active chat state. Alright, so when active chat changes, then that's when we want to really get our messages. And also we are going to need dispatch so that we can return it back to the null state. Alright, so let's create another use effect to handle this. Then this time around we want to track the active chat. So we want to check if active chat is turned null. So that's the essence of the data we are sending the item. So it can literally be anything. So if active chat, so one thing we can do here is we can decide not to return the data, we can just return true. This two will work. And I think that's what we should do. Then here we can re-get the message. So get messages. Then we can dispatch our action. So dispatch, the type is chat action, or rather active chat action. Then this time the payload will be null, because that's the default payload. Alright, and that's all we need to do to actually ensure the two users are chatting with each other. So let's confirm this. Alright, we have an error, unexpected token. Alright, so the issue here is that we didn't specify the context itself. So use context, then stop. Alright, so I think that should resolve it. So now I can close this and try to send message. Hello, Ben. Okay, Ben has not clicked on the sending. Okay, so Ben sees this. Also, I can send hello Oseni. Oseni sees it as well. Okay, so that's literally the flow. So the next thing now is to ensure that the bubble for each user is represented well. So let's quickly undo that. So on the chat interface, currently on the bubble type, I specify the bubble to always be the sender. However, I probably want to have a check at this point. So I will use a function to handle this. So undo bubble type. Then we can send in the item. Alright, so let's define this function. So item. Alright, so now in our item, let's console log it first. So console.log item, so that we can see the structure. So let's pull this. So console log. So if we click on our message, you see the item. So as you can see, we have the receiver, the receiver ID. That's the structure. So by default, However, sometimes when we send in message, we don't have those information at first instance. So let's say hello. Okay, that changed. So that was so fast. However, some points maybe it didn't change earlier. So let's quickly see the structure here to undo that. So the structure of our message is the sender ID. So at some point we can have sender ID or receiver ID here. Okay. So what we want to do is if item dot sender ID, then we just want to return the sender. So at that point we realize that it was the sender that is sending the message. So we just want to return sender as the type. However, when we now have access to the real sender.id and all those information, we can now check. So if item.sender.id is equivalent to the logged in user, so that would be this. Then that's the sender as well. So that will be return sender else return receiver. I think this one doesn't really need any return, or just an empty string should do. Alright, so let's check it again. Alright, so everything is coming in on the receiver end, or rather the sender end. Okay, let's troubleshoot some more. Okay, sender ID props.user. Alright, so the logged in user is user profile, so that means we still need to access user, or rather I think that's correct. So let's console log once more to see what we have, or better still, we can also access user here to get the user. Alright, so I think that's what we need to resolve. So the sender is the profile, then we can access the user from it, just like we did for the logged in user. And yeah, that should work. So let's return back to the normal flow and test again. Alright, so this person too has everything resolved. So let me send a new message. Okay, and as you can see, we get the message, and this also can reply. Okay, so also this comes in. Alright, so I think that's all we need to do to resolve this. So in the next episode, we would tidy up our chat app. So one of the things we are going to do is to ensure that this always scrolls to the bottom, because as you can see, when we send a message, we have to scroll it up to come to the bottom. So let's check. So as you can see, we have to scroll it. So that's not a very good experience. Then also we would implement the file, the picture upload, so that we can update our profile picture. And if we still have chance, we can implement file transfer as well, so sending file between each other. Yeah, and I think that's it. And also we would fix this. I think we can actually do that already. So let's see why this is not showing. Alright, so to resolve this, all we just have to do here is to change the up to and that should work. Alright, so that's done, and you can call it a day. So in the next episode, hopefully we'll be able to complete our, everything should be fine. Thanks everyone, see you in the next episode, and bye.